Picture a European city in the autumn of 1347. The streets smell of mud, wood smoke, and something harder to name. A mixture of fermentation and disease that hangs in the air like a warning no one yet knows how to read. In taverns, palaces, monasteries, and fields, a dark and cloudy liquid is poured into cups of pewter, clay, and silver. Men and women raise their vessels. They toast. They drink. What is inside those cups is not simply wine. It is an accidental chemical compound, an experiment with no scientist, a recipe built over centuries of ignorance and necessity. And for anyone transported from the modern world into that moment, a single sip would be enough to set in motion a slow, invisible, and irreversible process of poisoning. This is the story of medieval wine. A story that begins with grapes and ends with lead. If you made it this far, you already sense this is not a simple story. And it isn't. If you enjoy content that digs deep where history gets uncomfortable, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Every episode is a door into a past that most books would rather keep closed. To understand what was inside those cups, we first need to understand the problem medieval producers faced every single year. With brutal regularity, the wine went sour. Without refrigeration, without airtight bottles, without any knowledge that invisible microorganisms were converting alcohol into acetic acid, medieval European wines had a miserable shelf life. Within weeks, a barrel that had taken months of labor to produce turned into vinegar, and vinegar got no one drunk. The solution the ancient world had discovered, and which the Middle Ages inherited with gratitude, involved two substances that today appear on lists of industrial poisons: pine resin and lead acetate. Resin was the older of the two. Greeks and Romans had been using it for centuries, lining the interiors of clay amphorae with thick layers of pitch, a substance derived from the distillation of conifer resin. The effect was twofold. It prevented the wine from oxidizing by creating a barrier between the liquid and the air, and it gave the wine a distinctive sharp, resinous flavor that consumers of the time not only tolerated but expected. To medieval palates, shaped from childhood by this combination, a wine without that bitter, piney edge would have tasted strange, almost suspicious. The Romans called it vinum piccatum, pitched wine. Pliny the Elder wrote about it in the 1st century of the Common Era with the casual ease of someone describing something as ordinary as baking bread. The resin, however, carried terpene compounds that, consumed in large quantities over years, damaged the liver and kidneys in ways the medicine of the time had no tools to detect. The medieval man who died at 40 from liver failure had no idea the culprit was in his cup. He only knew that the wine tasted of forest, and that the forest somehow brought him comfort. But resin was only the beginning. The true villain of this story has a name, a weight, and a metallic shine. It is called lead. And before we go further, if this kind of historical investigation speaks to you, drop a like right now. It helps us keep making episodes like this one. The discovery of lead acetate as a sweetener was, in terms of historical consequences, one of the most catastrophic discoveries humanity ever made without realizing it. The process was straightforward. By boiling sour wine or grape juice in lead pots or vessels lined with lead alloy, producers obtained a thick, sweet syrup the Romans called sapa, or de frutum. This syrup had a remarkably pleasant taste, smooth, almost honey-like, and the ability to mask the acidity of spoiled wine, restoring a drinkability that the natural process had destroyed. What no one knew and could not have known without the chemistry of the 19th century was that this sweet flavor was the taste of lead acetate, also known to industrial-era pharmacists as sugar of lead. And lead, once ingested, is in no hurry. It accumulates in bones, in blood, in nerve tissue. It works in silence for months, for years, for decades. The symptoms it produces, abdominal cramps, chronic fatigue, extreme irritability, mental confusion, progressive paralysis of the limbs, were, in the Middle Ages, indistinguishable from dozens of other diseases for which available medicine had no answer. The contamination was not accidental, it was systematic. Lead and high-lead bronze cookware were the standard kitchen tools across medieval Europe. Lead was abundant, cheap, easy to smelt and shape, resistant to corrosion. It was the plastic of the Middle Ages, and just like plastic in the 20th century, its very ubiquity made it invisible as a threat. It was in the pots, in the plumbing of wealthier cities, in the soldering that sealed storage vessels, in the glazes used to coat the ceramic jars where wine rested. Modern researchers analyzing bones from medieval European skeletons have found consistently elevated lead concentrations, in some cases comparable to those of contemporary workers with occupational lead exposure. A study published in the early 21st century, conducted by archaeologists at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom, examined remains from medieval English cemeteries and documented bone lead levels that, by modern public health standards, would constitute an epidemiological emergency. And now, a quick pause for a question we genuinely want to ask. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We want to know how far this story is reaching. But let us return to the wine, because there was still a third layer of danger in that cup raised in a tavern in 1347. Medieval fermentation was an uncontrolled process, without selected yeasts, without regulated temperatures, without rigorous hygiene in the vessels. What fermented inside those barrels was a chaotic biological competition among dozens of different microorganisms. Beyond ethyl alcohol, the only type of alcohol the human body tolerates in small doses, wild fermentation produced variable amounts of methanol, higher alcohols known as fusel oils, and aldehydes that attack the central nervous system. The effects of a medieval hangover were not simply the product of how much had been consumed. They were the product of what had been consumed. Monasteries, it is true, produced technically superior wines. Benedictine and Cistercian monks accumulated over centuries an impressive body of empirical knowledge about viticulture and winemaking. They knew that certain grapes produced more stable wines. They knew that the cleanliness of barrels mattered. They knew that wine stored in cool cellars lasted longer. But even the finest monastic wine of the 14th century was, by modern analytical standards, a cocktail of compounds that no contemporary food safety regulator would ever let through. And then there was the problem of deliberate adulteration. It was not uncommon for unscrupulous merchants to add substances to wine designed to deceive the buyer. Honey to mask acidity, spices to disguise the smell of spoilage, medicinal herbs with psychoactive effects that artificially intensified the feeling of intoxication. Some of these herbs, belladonna and Jimson weed among them, were outright toxic at doses any single cup could easily contain. Wine was, in this sense, a deeply unequal product. The king drank from golden cups and kept tasters whose sole purpose was to die in his place if the wine had been poisoned. The peasant drank from the communal barrel with no screening of any kind. But the irony, and medieval history is rich in ironies, is that the European nobility, precisely because they could drink more, and from wines more heavily doctored with lead additives, were in some respects more exposed to chronic poisoning than the poor who drank less and from simpler vessels. Some historians have ventured the hypothesis that Saturnism, chronic lead poisoning, may have contributed to some of the behaviors that medieval records describe among members of the European aristocracy. Mood swings, erratic decisions, episodes of seemingly irrational violence. It is a hypothesis that cannot be proven with the tools available, but neither can it be dismissed. What can be stated with confidence is that medieval Europe drank, on average, quantities of wine that would astonish us today. Daily per capita consumption in wine-producing regions is estimated to have reached 1 liter per person, including children for whom wine diluted with water was considered safer than plain water, which was frequently contaminated. This estimate, documented in monastery records and labor contracts specifying daily wine rations for workers, means that an ordinary family ingested daily substantial doses of everything we have described: resins, heavy metals, byproducts of uncontrolled fermentation. Modern science has identified all of these dangers with surgical precision. We know the names of the compounds, we know the mechanisms by which they damage the body, we know the toxicity thresholds, we have the comfortable distance of the laboratory and of time to look back at those medieval cups with a mixture of horror and fascination. But that distance places us before a question with no simple answer. If the people of the 14th century had known what was in their wine, would they have stopped drinking it in a world where water was frequently deadly, where wine was social currency, religious symbol, and the only available anesthetic for the pain of a life without effective medicine? Was the choice really a choice? And as you sit with that question, it is worth asking another one. To what extent do we, with all our chemistry and all our science, still not fully know what is in our own cups? If this episode left that doubt somewhere inside you, share it with someone who needs to hear it too. And if you have not subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time. The next story is already waiting.